All right, and today we are going to be talking to one of the people who is here and locally um, in the Albany area. He has his own podcast called For the Love of Indie. His name is Drew Van Genderen.
Close.
Genderen. Let me bring it. All right, let me bring him in, and we can tell me how bad I butchered his name. Hey, how's it going?
It's going good. And it wasn't much butchering. It's Genderen. Hard G.
Genderen. Okay. So before we get into talk about your podcast, tell me about how you got into comic books. Do you remember the first one you read, or what kind of hooked you?
I do. The first comic I ever read. My uncle used to go to yard sales all the time and would pick me up all kinds of books. And the first one I ever read was an old issue of, I think it was Adventure Comics, where someone was getting voted off of the Legion of Superheroes. But after that, the next one I remember was, I think of all things, a Bionicle comic that came in a Lego magazine. So it's kind of been all over the place, but that Adventure Comics is what I remember first.
Okay. And what were those? Was that what besides indie comics? Are there any mainstream comics that you tend to gravitate towards?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when I was first starting out, I was really into Spider-Man, and I couldn't get enough of it. And anything I could find. Like, I think that my first Spider-Man issue was like an adaptation of the first Tobey Maguire movie, and I read it until the covers came off before I even realized that what's in that book isn't necessarily what's in whatever else is on the stand. So it was kind of eye-opening switching over to the real versions of the characters from the movies.
Yeah. So as we were talking about before, we are both members of the 11 o'clock comics podcast community on Facebook, and somehow I realized that you were in the area and you had your own podcast. So I thought, hey, why not see if you'd like to come in and talk about it? How did you find out about the 11 o'clock comics?
A couple of years back. I've been listening to them for, probably like 4 years now. And I was just really happy with what they were doing. And I know I could tell you for a fact that the work that they do kind of inspired me to start my podcast. But I just thought that their community for comics fans and the way that each one of those hosts, which is Vince, David, and Vince, David, and Jason. I thought they each brought a really interesting perspective, and it was cool to see that.
So let's talk about your podcast, For the Love of Indie. How did you said you were influenced by the 11 o'clock comics guys to start your own. What do you remember the first indie comic that you picked up and made you think that there's more to comics than maybe just capes and tights, as people like to put it?
Yeah. The first independent comic I read was Blankets by Craig Thompson. It was a Borders going out of business sale, and I saw it on a shelf, and I was like, well, it's really big. It'll take me a while. And I was immediately hooked after that.
And so tell us a little bit about the podcast. What do you cover besides, do you do like certain books, or just it's in your reading pile at the moment, or?
Sure. So I read my big stack of books, which typically I start amassing in September, because usually I go to Small Press Expo and I stock up on all the books that I want to talk about going forward. And obviously that's not happening this year. But from there, I just kind of go down my pile, and whatever strikes my fancy, I talk about. In my opinion, there's a bit too much negativity, and especially in comics reviewing, there's a lot of negativity.
What?
Yeah, right. So I make sure
crazy talk.
I know, it's absurd. So I make sure that the books that I talk about, I hate when I listen to a show and someone's like, now I read this one for you guys. It's like, no, I read books for me, and I'm going to tell you about these books that I personally liked. So I don't know. I think that having a positive spin on it, never talking about books that I don't give negative reviews because I don't talk about books we don't like. So
Right. Now, is it just you, or do you have somebody else that joins you?
I've had a few rotating members on the website. I have some folks who come on to write, and anybody's welcome to, as long as it works. And then on the actual show, I've had 2 or 3 people kind of step in and co-host with me a few times, including my wife and my son.
And how often do you put out the show, and how long do you usually, would you say you kind of go for?
Yeah, well, I was, when quarantine started, I was like, perfect. Look at this time to do this show. Well, not perfect. You know what I mean. But yeah. It's like, look, all this time to do this show. And I haven't had as much time as I thought, but I try to put out an article or 2 a week and an episode with show notes every other week. That's the goal. And typically, because it's normally me, I don't really dip too far off topic unless I'm really going crazy in my house. And so typically for me, I'm pretty straight and to the point. A 30-minute episode will get you 4 reviews, maybe a Kickstarter, as well as some titles that are coming out in the future.
How many are there? Any Kickstarters that you're currently supporting, or recent ones that have completed that you had the stuff for that you really enjoyed?
Unfortunately, I don't have any recent ones. The most recent Kickstarter that I participated in was for a book by artists Dave Baker and Nicole Gu, which was Fever Coast, part of a creator-owned series that they were working on. Later collected in a Silver Sprocket anthology.
Okay.
Yeah. I just, I like talking about books that people... there's just so much out there, and I feel like at some point the industry just gets so full. So the books that I talk about are books that I think maybe don't necessarily always get the attention they deserve, or should just be on people's radar. And as things shift, and as literally everything around us shifts, the subject matter of those books changes a little bit too. Maybe I'll throw in some stuff that's a little bit more political, but it's always just books that I like and agree with and think other people will like too.
So, are there any ones that you're particularly digging at the moment?
Yeah, so I just got the latest graphic novel adaptation of The Adventure Zone, the podcast by the McElroy brothers, who do My Brother and Me. And that's really cool. It's written by Clint McElroy, who's the father of the boys, and then the artist is Carrie Pietsch, and it's put out by First Second, and it's just fun fantasy stuff. It kind of introduces a game master, dungeon master character who helps narrate this journey that's really just all over the place. It's pretty explosive stuff. Good fantasy.
Yeah. Any indie creators that you think will are ones to watch, or will be making a name for themselves soon?
Definitely. First to pop into my head is Rosemary Valero O'Connell. She, this past year, worked with Mariko Tamaki to put out the title Laura Dean Keeps Breaking Up With Me, also by First Second. And then she also put out a book, an anthology of her own short stories, and like the amount of talent on each page and like what kind of storytelling style she uses, like it really grabs you. If we don't see that name much more often in 5 years, I will be shocked.
Mm-hmm. So what tips do you have for somebody who may want to get into the indie creator scene, but kind of doesn't know where to start? Because I mean, there's you have the superhero, then you have the indie comics, which is like a very broad spectrum of everything. I guess my question is, what would you suggest for people who are new to the to indie comics?
Well, everybody has a story to tell, and I think that a lot of people think that they could think and hope that they could put out their story, and then that'll be that. That's they've done the thing, it's out there, and everyone's going to enjoy it. But the process is just so much bigger than that. And especially if somebody hasn't written a comic before, starting small, like starting with something like a zine, just 8 pages showing your idea, is a good way to gauge interest and just to get your idea out there. My biggest piece of advice, though, is if you're going to create something, make sure that before you show it to people that you're proud of what you create. Personally, I've seen a lot of titles from across the spectrum, and you could tell the people who really believe in their idea and the people who just want to make a comic for the sake of making a comic. You could feel it. And so that would be my biggest piece of advice, is just be proud of whatever you're going to be sending to people. Like that's the sign that you're ready to show people, is that you're proud of it.
So, has there been one indie comic that's like made an impact on you more than, another one?
Yeah, most recently, I'm having a hard time thinking of the author's name. I have it on my shelf. Give me 1 second.
All right, sure.
Okay, so there's a book from Drawn and Quarterly that came out by Yansik Hong called Uma's Table, and it was just this it's a fictional story about a family that is trying to make a life for themselves, but kind of living in the shadows of having to take care of one of the parents. And it's not the happiest story in the world, but I thought it was like really full of relatable experiences. And it was interesting seeing a character grow up and then realize both how their thinking of their family can be a little damaging, but also how they can grow from it.
Now, I've never been to any of the small press like conventions. How do those kind of differ from, let's say, well, obviously there's the small press, and then there's like a New York con, or how would you just, I don't know if you can describe how they're different, or how why they are probably would be better for people.
Sure. I've been to the big cons too. Like I've been to a few New York Comic Cons and stuff, and the audience in general is entirely different. Like when I go to a small press expo, I'm sure that there are people who go to both. But a lot of times I find the audience at a small press expo to be more in line with the type of books that they're trying to sell. You have people who are a bit more independent or alternative, or who are just looking for stories that have something a little bit more than a cape and a cowl. Not that there's anything wrong with that, obviously. But for me, when I go to the smaller shows, the thing that I see more of than at those larger shows is like, because there's not going to be as many people at MICE as there is at New York Comic Con, the Massachusetts Independent Comics Expo. Yeah. But all the same, the people that are there are just so excited to see the creators that are creating these books and just immediately releasing them to the public, and doing so with titles that really took them a lot of time and heart. I can't think of a good way to describe it, but basically I just think that the audience I think it's a much more mellow audience, which makes for a much more, in my opinion, pleasant experience.
Now, aside from any writers, do you follow any like indie creator or like artists?
Yeah, you mean like on Instagram?
Yeah, or follow their if they do a project or.
Oh yeah, sure. As far as artists, I will always follow the work of Josh Baer. He's just got this really raw style that I cannot stop looking at. I've reread each of his titles probably 4 or 5 times each. I just can never get enough. There's always more to see. And then Tilly Walden, who's kind of making a big name for herself right now with Spinning and her most recent title, Are You Listening? Oh, and of course, Ezra Clayton Daniels. I will always talk about his books. He does these sort of science fiction, but with political bend to them. That's not like in your face. It's just here it is, and the characters have to deal with it. And I kind of think that's a cool quality.
Now, have you ever had the bug to kind of try to write your own, or just do you just enjoy, reading other people's?
I would really like to, but and I'm kind of working on like figuring out what drawing is for me and how to even do it. But for me, I think I started a little bit late, so we'll see how that pans out.
Well, is there did you have anything else you wanted to mention about, maybe D&D comics in general, or, it's maybe something I didn't have, I kind of dabble with D&D comics.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I recognize names, I recognize, different things, but
Mm-hmm.
you seem to be, really well versed in that, that area.
Oh, thank you. Well, I think that suggesting titles could make your recording take hours, but I could tell you a few publishers to definitely look out for if you want to try dabbling into independent comics for yourself. So if you're looking for things that are more easily accessible, then Image Comics is the most popular independent comics publisher, I would say. But then other than that, I would recommend the publishers Silver Sprocket, Radiator Comics, Birdcage Bottom Books, and Retrofit Big Planet Comics. They are they're my favorites. They're always my go-tos.
And do you, on your show, do you try to, have you done any interviews with the indie creators, or is it just you kind of talking about the work?
Tearing up, excuse me.
It's okay.
Yeah, no, I've done quite a few. I've had Ezra Clayton Daniels, who I talked about just a second ago, and C. Spike Trotman from Iron Circus Comics, and Whit Taylor, who's worked on Fizzle for Radiator Comics, and Josh Bayer. A lot of people who I talked about I've had on the show.
Yeah. No, it makes perfect sense that. So, but no, yeah, I mean, indie comics, like I said, is I would say it's kind of one of my blind sides when it comes to the comic books. Which,
oh yeah,
and if I had the time, then I would, love to, to try to get more into it, but just kind of, but I'll have to listen to your show and see what I need to read.
Well, and that's that was my big hope with the show, is that even if I stop doing it, it'll still be up as essentially a catalog if anybody else wants to explore independent titles for themselves and see some things that they might not have otherwise seen. In an ideal world, these will all the books that I talk about are going to get a good amount of attention, and they will be seen, but some stuff, a little push helps.
Oh, definitely. If you don't have anything else, I'd like to, thank you for taking the time to chat, and, anytime you'd like to chat, I mean, maybe, we could, I could read an indie book, and maybe I could talk with you.
Hey, I'd be down, man, anytime. Oh, can I mention my website?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, cool. So if you'd like to...
No websites.
I'll just give my actual address then. Yeah, so if you'd like to check out my podcast or any of the posts that I've done, or even do a guest post, there's a contact link on there. You can go to www.fortheloveofindie.com. Like I said, I update it whenever I can, but life is busy, so...
Oh, you're telling me.
Oh, yeah.
That's one of the reasons why I started doing these interviews over, video interviews, because it was just so much easier than trying to contact somebody, taking it, writing it, putting it up on the blog.
Oh, yeah. I totally get that. Yeah, the show notes seem to take me the longest on mine.
Well, you're welcome back anytime to, if you so like, and I'll definitely include the links in the video, and stay safe, stay healthy, and maybe we'll see each other, at an Albany Con or something if it ever happens again.
Yeah, man, I would. I'd love that. And maybe next time I see you, I'll sweat less.
Yeah. Look at this. I love the beard, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Likewise.
Well, I kind of had to. I was rocking a pretty cool beard, but then I kind of had to trim it down for the whole, mask thing.
Oh yeah. I found one that works, but it's a struggle.
Yeah, my neighbor made me one too, but it was that, and then the really hot days we've been having. It's just it'll grow back.
That's the spirit.
All righty, well, you take care, and I'll let you know when this is up.
All right, thanks again, man.
Right.
This was fun.
Yep, definitely. All right.
All right, have a good one.
All right. Bye.